The Communist Party of China celebrates its centenary this year. The footprints of the party's founders and early leaders across the world in pursuing a new China have drawn attention from historians and scholars over the last 100 years. Starting in 1919, thousands of young Chinese arrived in Western Europe to study while working. Some of them, inspired by Marxism, established the earliest CPC groups locally and became pioneers of salvaging China in the coming decades. In today's programme, we'll revisit the footprints of those early leaders in Europe to see what inspired them to embark on a special journey of saving the nation. First, we're heading to the UK, where, according to historical documents, Zhou Enlai, who was to become the first premier of New China, once set foot to explore how local dock workers went about their lives. Let's go now to our correspondent Jin Jing, who's at one of London's old docks. Hi Jing, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. As you can see, I'm right now here at one of the old docks in East London. Well, these docks bears witness to the history of London, from the capital of the British Empire to one of the most bustling cities in Europe. Here you can see this is the Museum of London Docklands. The museum itself was once a sugar warehouse built in the 18th century, but you may not know that these docks also bore the footprints of one special Chinese man, Zhou Enlai. About a century ago, that is in 1921, Zhou Enlai, who later became the Chinese premier, set his foot on these docks to examine the lives of workers here. At that time, Zhou was only a young man in his 20s. And this was part of his efforts to look into the capitalist system while exploring the path of saving his nation, China. Today we are more than pleased to have a special guest with us, Zhang Feng. Well, he is the chairman of the UK's Chinese Student and Scholars Association. He's been living in the UK for 8 years now, and he's quite an expert in the history of early leaders of the CPC. Hi Feng, why do you think the early Chinese leaders wanted to come to Europe, and why Zhou Enlai wanted to come to the UK in particular?
Thank you. It is a great honor to participate in today's show. I think the reason for the pioneers of the revolution choosing Europe and coming to the UK needs to be considered in the context of the time. China was in turmoil in 1920, and against this background, a group of the patriotic young people wanted to find a way to save and develop the country and to gain the real knowledge from the practice. They began to study abroad as learning from foreigners to develop skills. In 1920, UK was the center of the world. Zhou Enlai wrote in a letter to his cousin, "London is the largest capital in the world." At that time, UK was the first country known as a cradle of industrial revolution and industrialization in the world, and it was also an important representative of the Western capitalism. Zhou Enlai once wrote, "The wheel of world can be found here. This place is a political and a commercial center of the world. London is the epitome of the world. It is not only attending classes to learn the knowledge, but everything in this city could also worth studying." This might be the reason why Zhou Enlai would like to travel to the UK.
Very well. Well, according to multiple sources, Zhou had set foot on factories, coal mines, and of course these docks of London. To your knowledge, what did he see at that time? Why do you think he would come to the docks to see for himself the UK society and the British workers?
British docks are the epitome of British society and the capitalist system. As a famous Chinese poet, Du Fu wrote, "While the rich people wine and dine, the poor people die of cold by the roadside." After World War I, the UK had turned from creditor to the debtor. There was an economic downturn. Unemployment rates are rising. The gap between the rich and the poor widened, and the opposition between the workers and the capitalists had become increasingly serious. We often say that the train station is the best place if you want to observe all kinds of social life. From the UK at the time, docks and harbors are still the important symbol of the empire on which the sun never sets. Therefore, Zhou Enlai chose dogs to get a closer look at the reality behind the naval and the imperial power.
Well, during his time in the UK, Zhou wrote a few articles for Chinese newspapers about what he had seen and what he was thinking. It is understood that Zhou already had some initial thoughts about the path of revolution for China.
Indeed, after 1 month, young Zhou Enlai realized the fact that countries with different systems had different reactions and current situations. In a letter to his cousin, Zhou Enlai mentioned his analysis on social revolution, the extremity of being stable in conservation, while the extremity of being radical is rebellion. People in Britain achieved success because of conservation, and meanwhile, success was achieved in the Soviet Russia by the rebellion. Clearly, Zhou Enlai has been thinking a lot about which way to take to save China. These thoughts underlay a solid foundation for choosing the correct way in China's revolution afterwards.
Well, so you are a student yourself. How do you understand these revolutionaries like Zhou Enlai, who came all the way to Europe to study while exploring the path of saving China?
If our young are strong, our country will be strong. We Chinese students and scholars in the UK are the future of our motherland. Only when we learn well and can better use what we have learned, can we take responsibility for our country and build a better future for our motherland. Coming to this talk today, I feel very impressed. Zhou Enlai and many other revolutionaries must have a patriotic heart, looking for the path of China's revolution. The stability and development of China enjoys the right now and are inseparable from the pursuit of these revolutionary pioneers back then.
Very well said. The world today is very different from 100 years ago. And also the coronavirus has changed the world in ways we never thought it would before. So Zhang, you are in the UK during this time. How did you feel watching countries around the world fight the pandemic?
It was indeed a difficult year, even though China was the first hit hard by the pandemic. The country soon effectively brought the pandemic under control. In the early days of the pandemic in the UK, the Chinese government didn't forget the overseas students and sent us the healthy kits, including masks and some Chinese medicine, to help us fight the pandemic. At that time, many of my friends posted on social media messages of gratitude. The motherland is always with us. We're all over the WeChat moments. The UK is one of the countries in the European worst hit by the coronavirus. I believe the UK government is doing what it can do to contain the pandemic. Its vaccination program has proved to be a success. What most concerns me is baseless rumors and slanders related to China, and the anti-Asian prejudice and even violence. I think different countries should really work together to fight the coronavirus. After all, the virus is our common enemy.
Thank you very much, Zhang Feng. From the young Zhou Enlai to many Chinese students today, even though they are a century apart, they all share a strong desire to acquire knowledge and try to gain a better understanding of the world through hard work and study. Originally, Zhou Enlai had planned to apply for University of Edinburgh, but because of the high living costs in the UK, after a month in London, Zhou returned to France in February 1921 to further his study there. His journey continued, so would our live report today. Thank you very much for joining us, Zhang Feng. And this is all we have for now. Back to the studio.
Thanks, Ding. Around a century ago, thousands of progressive young Chinese travelled across the oceans to France for work-study programs. Over 300 of them stayed in the small city of Montargis. They included Deng Xiaoping, who later became the Chinese leader and the chief architect of China's reform and opening up, and Tsai He-sen, one of the founding members of the CPC. In 2016, a museum opened in Montargis to tell the history of the Chinese diligent work Bruegel study movement with documents, photos and videos. Now let's cross over to Xinhua, our correspondent in France, who's at the museum to trace the footsteps of Chinese revolutionary pioneers in Montargis.
Hello, this is Xue in Montargis, a small city about 100 kilometers to the south of Paris. I'm now standing in front of a building with a history of over 300 years. It used to be the residence of some Chinese students who worked and studied in Montargis in the 1920s. Now, it is the museum of the Chinese work-study movement in France. The museum opened in August 2016. The building has 3 floors and a loft. It covers an area of 173 square meters with a building area of 421 square meters. In its exhibition area, some 320 square meters, we can follow the history of Chinese work-study movement in France in the 1920s. Now let's go inside and have a look. At the entrance, we can see 2 porcelain plates with underglazed paintings. One shows the ferry station at Xiangjiang River, Hunan Province in 1919. It was the departure point of the young students 100 years ago. On the other place, we can see the Montargis railway station in 1919. That was the arrival points for these Chinese students. Connecting the two, we have the journey of the work-study movement. That's why the museum has them placed at the beginning of the exhibition. Let's go inside and look at the other parts of the exhibition. This model represents a ship from a century ago. From the beginning of 1919 to the end of 1920, more than 1,600 Chinese young people came to France for the work-study programs. Among them were Cai Hesen, Xiang Jingyu, and Li Fuchun. Their dreams started as their ships sailed onto the sea. Setting off from Huangpu Port in Shanghai or Mawei Port in Fujian, they crossed the East China Sea, the South China Sea, and passed through the Strait of Malacca to enter the Indian Ocean. Finally, they crossed the Mediterranean Sea, and after thousands of miles, they arrived in France. Let's go upstairs and have a look. Now we are on the 2nd floor of the museum. On the wall is a large black and white photo. On it, we can see a group of young Chinese with typical students' look, full of youthful energy and looking very determined. The photo was taken in Duce Park, not far from the museum. In 1920, Cai Hesen and Xiang Jingyu convened all work-study students in France to meet in the park. They discussed how to transform China and the world. During their discussions, Cai Hesen proposed to build a political party and follow the road of the October Revolution in Russia. We're still on the 2nd floor of the museum, and this set of table and chair is the same used by students at the French schools in the 1920s. We can imagine how Cai Hesen managed to study and work during his stay in Montargis. With the help of dictionary, he translated many Marxist pamphlets into Chinese, including the main chapters of major works such as the Communist Manifesto. He then posted the translations on the wall for his comrades to read and discuss. As I introduced, the museum has 3 floors. Now let's go see upstairs. Here we have 2 yellow cards that are an important part of the exhibition. One is the residence registration card of Deng Xiaoping. The other is his work card. We are honored today to have Ms. Wang Peiwen, curator of the museum and also the director of the France-China Friendship Association of Montargis. She will join us today. Ms. Wang, hello, 你好，王老师，请问您能给我们介绍一下这2张卡片背后的故事吗？
这份呢是那个邓锡贤，就是邓小平当年用的名字，的工卡，在哈金森工厂工作的工卡。这是他的居留证。邓小平呢，他是16岁来到法国，他在哈金森工厂呢度过他18岁的生日。他在这儿呢，受到了王若飞、赵世炎这些革命先觉性的影响。后来呢，他在这里呢，同时也工作的也是比较艰苦。每天差不多在10个小时到10几个小时的工作量哈。那么他在这儿呢，就是坚定了这个马克思主义的理念。在这些好多的中国青年进步青年都在这儿呢，接受了共产主义的信仰，走向了共产主义道路。
好，谢谢您。Ms. Wang said that Deng Xiaoping arrived in France in 1920 when he was only 16 years old. 2 years later, at the age of 18, he came to Montargis and worked at the Hutchinson rubber factory. He worked 10 hours a day and spent the rest of his time studying. The working and living conditions were extremely hard. In Montargis, he was influenced by revolutionary pioneers such as Zhao Shiyan and Wang Ruofei, and then he embarked on a lifelong quest for communism. Many young Chinese, like Deng Xiaoping, connected to the workers thanks to their work experiences and gradually turned into firm believers in Marxism. Please follow me. In this museum, the photos and documents can take us back to the youth of early leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. As China's first overseas party history museum, the Museum of Chinese Work-Study Movement in France has become an important place to share the stories of China. The logo letter M represents the French word musée, which refers to this museum where the overseas journey and growth of these young Chinese is recorded. It also represents the first letter of Montargis, the name of the city, and it makes this small French city more visible and better understood in China. The graphic design of the letter M has it divided into 2 parts, one in red, one in blue. The 2 parts are connected like 2 people facing each other and shaking hands. It symbolizes the evergreen friendship between China and France. And this concludes our journey in Montargis. Now back to you, Dale.
Thanks, Ushua. Chinese students in work-study programs have left their footprints elsewhere in France, searching for the future of the then impoverished China. Now, let's head over to Paris, where our correspondent Xiao Yajor is at a small hotel.
Hello, this is Xiao Yazhuo in Paris. I'm now in front of a small hotel named Neptune Hotel, next to Place d'Italie in the 13th district of Paris. It was in this hotel that Zhou Enlai lived for more than 2 years during his stay in France. This photo of Zhou Enlai was taken at this place. There is a ventilation opening in the photo, and we can still see it here. The iron fence in the photo has been removed, but we can still see the traces of the fixed fence here. This small hotel and the small street where it is located must have seen the hard and busy days of Zhou Enlai in France. This place tells us the youth of Zhou Enlai. It is marked by his footprints in search of truth to save the country and the people. Here we can see a green dark marble plaque on the facade of the wall of the hotel. At the top is a portrait of Zhou Enlai. At the bottom is 3 characters Zhou Enlai in Chinese. It is the handwriting of Deng Xiaoping. There is also a note in French at the bottom of the portrait, which said, Zhou Enlai lived here during his stay in France from 1922 to 1924. This plaque was placed by French government in October 1979 on the occasion of the 15th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and France. And now, come with me to get into the hotel. Paris was one of the main gathering places of work-study students in France. But it is difficult to verify the exact locations of many historical events. Neptune Hotel, being Zhou Enlai's residential place, is one of the few sites that have been verified after research. In 1920, at the age of 22, Zhou Enlai set out from Shanghai to study in France. Soon after arriving in Paris, Zhou Enlai, who was not well off, settled down here. While working studying, he did social research and wrote newsletters for Tianjin Yi Shibao. In these newsletters, he reported in detail the political and social conditions in France and Europe at large, as well as the living conditions of Chinese people here. The hotel was also a main place where Zhou Enlai was engaged in revolutionary activities. Deng Xiaoping, Nie Rongzhen, Chen Yi, Li Fuchun, and other revolutionary young Chinese in France have left their footprints here and forged deep friendship. In this hotel, Zhou Enlai also took part in the editing and publishing of Youth, a revolutionary pamphlet, literally named Red Light. Zhou Enlai was in charge of planning and writing. Li Fuchun, Deng Xiaoping, and others later joined in. They worked for a living during the day and worked for publishing at night. Deng Xiaoping mainly worked on wax plates and mimeographs. The wax plates he engraved were so good that comrades jokingly called him Dr. Mimeo. In 2001, a Chinese couple, Li Jianle and Yang Yanchun, who had been in France for many years, decided to do hotel business. After visiting many hotels, they set their eyes on Neptune Hotel. The well-equipped hotel was cozy and warm, but what attracted them most was its link with Zhou Enlai. We are glad to have Mr. Li Jianle as guest of our program today.
欢迎大家，欢迎大家。
OK， 李先生好，您能帮忙简单介绍一下这个房子的相关情况吗？
好的啊，这个呢就是当年周恩来总理啊，在这个旅法留学期间呢，1922年到1924年啊居住的这个房间啊，这个房间呢是在咱们中国的1层，在法国叫0层啊。为什么选择在0层呢？因为0层吧，总理呢对这个 其他的这个住客呢影响比较小，因为经常会有一些活动啊，有些朋友来访啊，有各种这个组织活动啊，等等等等的啊。另外呢，这个房间呢原来呢是非常小啊，并不像大家现在看到的这样，大概只有9个平米左右啊，甚至还不到，只能放一张床、一张桌子，一张椅子，还有一个简单的这个衣柜啊。这里面呢不具备任何的这个卫生设施啊。
Zhou Enlai's room was on the first floor. In France, it is called zero floor. Mr. Li told us that this room has been renovated. As you can see, it is not big even now, but the interior is much better than before. We have sanitary facilities now, toilet and shower, but there was no such equipment when Zhou Enlai lived here. When he lived here, the room was also not this big. There was no sanitary facilities, only a bed, a desk, and a small cabinet. In an article written on the occasion of the 19th anniversary of Zhou Enlai's birth, Mian Rongzhen said, Enlai's life in France was very difficult. He lived in a small hotel at 17 Avenue Godefroy near Plaza de Italy in Paris. It was indeed a tiny room, which was less than 10 square meters. It was his residence, also the center of our publications and party activities. When there were too many people, it is impossible to get all inside. We had to go to a nearby cafe. Each time when I went to Enlai's place, I saw him either discussing with someone or busy writing at the desk. The meal was usually a few slices of bread, a plate of vegetable, sometimes even no vegetable, only bread eaten with boiled water. This hotel has become a must-visit spot for people who come to France to trace the footprints of the Chinese Revolution. Many Chinese, when staying at this hotel, wanted to live in the room where Premier Zhou once lived. There are also many French and foreign tourists come here, laying flowers under the plaque to express their admiration for the Chinese leader. And this is what we had in Paris. Thank you.
Thanks. Joining us now is our correspondent in Belgium, Alex Wright, who's in Charleroi to tell another story of Chinese pioneers seeking a path to save their motherland.
Hello everyone, welcome to Charleroi, an industrial city in the south of Belgium. 100 years ago, a group of Chinese students came here to undertake a work and study program, keen to learn and to find ways to save their motherland and its people. This is the statue of Paul Pasteur, the founder of the University of Labour. In a moment, we will go to his office on the top floor of the library, and thanks to historian Willy Pourcel, we will relive the journey of these early Chinese communist believers who travelled far and wide to find revolutionary truth and enlightenment. Charleroi, a small city in southern Belgium, was once at the heart of the country's metallurgy, glass manufacturing and power industries. 100 years ago, dozens of fresh-faced Orientals, bristling with energy and enthusiasm, set foot in this industrial city. They were young Chinese exchange students, eager to undertake a work and study program at the Charleroi University of Labour, which they hoped would inspire them to save their motherland and its people. In the 1920s and 1930s, proletarian revolutionaries, including Mian Rongzhen, Liu Bojian, Xiong Weigeng, He Changgong and others studied here. Inspired by the experience of Chinese Labour Corps during the First World War, China launched a vigorous work-study movement in France in the 1920s called the Diligent Work-Frugal Study Movement, which gave birth to the Lyon Sino-French University. Charleroi University of Labour became one of the schools that welcomed a vast majority of these Chinese students. Chinese University of Labour was founded in 1903 and was part of the famous industrial technical schools that mushroomed across Europe. Unlike universities in the traditional sense, Charleroi University of Labour focuses on workers and their right to enjoy an education as much as possible. The university not only imparts knowledge to students, but also expects students to enter the workshop to learn practical techniques. Hope for national progress and national rejuvenation were the bold words echoed by the work-study students at the time. And it was also the voice of the Chinese society in that era. Among these students, the most famous was Marshal Nie Rongzhen. At the end of 1921, Nie Rongzhen, then 22, moved from France to Charleroi to attend the University of Labour. In the summer of 1922, he was admitted to the Department of Chemical Engineering. In the library of Charleroi University of Labour, he read Communist Manifesto, State and Revolution, Communist ABC, and other books, and often read communist publications from China to Europe. In August, introduced by Liu Bodian and Xiong Weigeng, Nie Rongzhen joined the Communist Party of China in Belgium, which had been established by Chinese students studying here in Europe for over 2 months. From that moment on, he embarked on the path to communism. So this is Paul Pastor's office, where we can find a whole array of items of memorabilia that shed light on the journey that these Chinese students undertook when they came all those years ago. With me is Mr. Willy Pourcel, a historian at the Charleroi University of Labour, who's accompanying us on this tour today. Bonjour Monsieur Pourcel, tout d'abord un tout grand merci d'avoir accepté notre entretien. J'aimerais tout d'abord vous poser une première question par rapport à tous ces documents historiques que j'ai entendu que vous avez rassemblés, collectés et triés à travers les années. Je veux savoir si vous pouvez nous donner un peu une brève description de ces documents historiques qui expliquent un peu, ou qui racontent un peu l'histoire de ces étudiants chinois qui sont venus ici il y a 100 ans.
Tout d'abord, nous sommes dans le bureau de Paul Pasteur, qui était le fondateur de l'école. L'école a été créée en 1903. Et le but de l'école peut se résumer d'une devise.
So we're here.
Une devise toute simple. Servir l'homme, servir l'industrie. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Servir l'homme, c'est-à-dire qu'on est dans une ville ouvrière où la situation des ouvriers à l'époque, il y a plus de 100 ans, était assez difficile. Et donc Paul Pasteur voulait que ces fils d'ouvriers puissent obtenir des connaissances suffisantes pour acquérir un bon métier et avoir un avenir assuré.
So we're here in the office of Paul Pasteur, which was founded in 1903, and the whole objective of this university was to give and offer opportunities for workers and labourers who perhaps didn't have opportunities elsewhere. And so in this office there are all sorts of items of memorabilia related to the University of Labour and all the hard work that's been done. Ensuite, une question par rapport à ces étudiants chinois. Donc, quand est-ce que l'université a commencé à accepter des étudiants chinois? Combien ont été acceptés en total? Et qu'est-ce qu'ils ont principalement étudié ici?
Il faut vous dire que Édouard Herriot, qui était le maire de Lyon, Lyon a créé le premier centre franco-chinois d'études. Donc, à l'initiative notamment du gouvernement chinois, on a envoyé des centaines d'étudiants étudier en Europe pour acquérir des connaissances qui seraient utiles au développement de la Chine. Et Édouard Herriot connaissait très bien Charleroi parce qu'il avait visité l'université du travail. Et donc il s'était dit que ce serait une école très intéressante parce qu'on formait des techniciens. Et la Chine avait beaucoup besoin vraiment de gens formés dans les techniques industrielles pour développer le pays.
So hundreds of Chinese students came here, and they, at the time, China needed technical students to learn technical skills. And so a sister university was founded in France, and then subsequently students were sent here from France to Belgium, and they learned practical technical skills that were required back home in China.
Dernière petite question. Donc vous avez dit dans votre mail que vous étiez assez fier du travail effectué par cette université pour former ces étudiants chinois dans les années 20. Je veux savoir si j'avais juste quelques petits commentaires à faire à ce niveau-là, quelques petites observations, etc.
Bien, dans les années 20, vous savez, la situation en Chine est difficile et elle cherchait un avenir plus radieux. Et donc, c'est vrai que ça a été une opportunité pour ces étudiants chinois de découvrir l'Europe avec ses connaissances, sachant que la Chine aussi est une grande civilisation, mais l'Europe apportait des connaissances plus techniques, industrielles, qui étaient vraiment nécessaires pour que la Chine fasse un grand bond. Et pour nous, les Belges, c'était très intéressant aussi d'accueillir des étrangers qui venaient apporter aussi une autre culture et une autre vision du monde. Et ça a permis à la Belgique, quelque part, de s'ouvrir à l'extérieur.
So I was very proud to be able to, or Belgium at the time was very proud to be able to participate in these programs, because it allowed people from different cultures and from different parts of the world to come here and mix and mingle and interact with the local Belgian population. And it was also an opportunity for Belgium to open its doors to foreign cultures and foreign people.
Ici, donc, il date de 1921 pour commémorer l'accord entre les responsables chinois et les responsables de l'école ici à l'IT pour la venue des étudiants chinois, je crois.
Quelle est 1921?
1921.
In 1921, this was a book that celebrates and honors the commitment made by both parties, so in China and here the local mayor here as well, and signatures you can see on this book.
Ici, vous voyez en fait le home des Chinois, avec la collaboration du gouvernement chinois de l'époque et les autorités de la province de Hainaut. On a aménagé un lieu pour héberger tous les étudiants chinois qui venaient à Charleroi, à un prix modique, qui pouvaient donc se loger sans libre.
So these were the housing accommodation where the Chinese students resided and lived and slept and were accommodated by So we're saying goodbye now to Mr. Willy Pourcet, which very kindly invited us here to observe and explore the fascinating display of memorabilia that he has here that recounts all sorts of marvelous stories of these Chinese students that came all these years ago.
Thanks, Alex. Now, our correspondent Zhang Yuan will take us to Göttingen in Germany. Here, the footprints of young Chinese revolutionaries in the early 1920s were hidden in the historical archives, attesting to a chapter of China's national awakening. Among them was Zhu De, one of the major founders of the People's Republic of China, and the first of the top 10 marshals in the People's Liberation Army. Hi, Zhang Yuan.
Hello there, this is Zhang Yuan in the university city of Göttingen. Zhu De pursued his studies here, and no one at that time would probably believe that Zhu De later became one of the major founders of the People's Republic of China, and he ranked the first of the top 10 marshals in the People's Liberation Army. Zhu, born in 1886, was not an ordinary student at that time. He was a military officer and took part in the 1911 revolution that overthrew the Qing dynasty. Later, he joined the wars against the then sprouting warlords in China. He was a major general, gendarmerie commander of southwest China's Yunnan province. Well, we heard that in Göttingen City Archive, there are a lot of documents concerning Zhu, and today we have the honor to invite Rolf Kohlstedt to join us to introduce what he has found in the archive. Hello, nice to meet you, Mr. Kohlstedt.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Young.
Yeah.
Welcome to the City Archive in Göttingen.
Yeah. Could you introduce us? What have you found in the City Archive?
In the city archive, we have several documents about Chute. And Chute came in 1923 to Göttingen. And when you came to study and live in Göttingen, you have to announce where you live to the local administration. And this was the registration card. There you can see where he lived in Göttingen, where he came from, and where he went when he leaves Göttingen. He came from Berlin in 1923, first lived at the Wiener Landstraße in this building. It's right on the other side of the street from this building. Yeah. And later in that year, he went to Planckstraße 3. That's this building. And at that building was unveiled in 1986 the commemoration plaque for Chute. It means Chute, Marshal der Volksrepublik China, also Marshal of the People's Republic of China, and this is the time where he lived in that building. It's from 1923 to 1924, and in 1924, in December, he went back to Berlin, where he came from, to Göttingen. And these are photos from the unveiling. And when he was in Göttingen, he studied social science and was a member of the Chinese Students Group, oder Students Association Göttingen, auf Deutsch, in German, Chinesischer Studentenverein Göttingen. And this is a photo from the Chinese Students Association from 1923. In the first row, the fourth from the right, this one was Chute. And we have some other documents. The Chinese Students Association wants to publish leaflets about and inform the people about the situation in China, and you have to, and this is a letter, an application, to get an application to publish this leaflets. This is a letter from the Chinese Students Association, and here you find, this is the draft of the leaflet, written with a typewriter, and this is the original leaflet. It's printed. The title was "Was geht in China vor?" In English, it means "What happens in China," and it describes the actual situation in China to inform the people here in Göttingen. And that's all the documents we preserve in our archive. Thank you very much. Thank you for the information.
Yeah, it was a pleasure for me. Thank you.
And that's all from here in Göttingen City Archive. Back to the studio.
After that, you may be curious about what Zhu's life was like. Now, Zhang Yuan is taking us to visit the house where Zhu lived during his time in Göttingen. Although almost 100 years have passed, Zhu's time in the city is still remembered by locals.
We are now at number 3 Planckstraße in Göttingen. This is the place where Zhu once lived. We can see the building with a 2-floor red brick house. A delicate marble plaque on the facade of the villa reads Zhu, Marshal of People's Republic of China, from 1923 to 1924. The plaque was unveiled here in 1986 by Göttingen City Mayor to commemorate Zhu's 100th birthday.
Thanks, Zhang Yuan. We know that Zhu studied social sciences at Göttingen University. He became an icon of the Chinese students studying there and was even honored as a role model.
Right now, I'm standing in the campus of Göttingen University. We know that Zhu once studied social sciences here in the university. And behind me, in one of these buildings, he might take some courses here. And today we have the luck to invite Chairman of the Chinese Student Union, Wang Jiawen, to join us to talk a little bit more about Zhu. Hello, Jiawen.
Hello.
And could you tell us a little bit more about Zhu?
Okay.
In your eyes?
Yes. Zhu is the second chairman of our student union. He tried hard during his stay to introduce China to people in Göttingen. and make them understand and support the revolution in China. Well, in our student union activity, he has always been an inspiration for us all. And we also introduce him to others when we are talking about our university. We think actually he is a bonding image for us all.
Thank you very much, Java.
Zhude was arrested twice because of his involvement in the revolutionary activities in Germany. Later, he was expelled from Germany and went to the Soviet Union to study military affairs. In Germany, Zhu found the right path to save the Chinese nation, namely communism. He joined Chinese Communist Party here in Berlin, and in 1926, he went back to China. That will be all from here. Back to the studio.
Well, that was quite the trip across Europe. Retracing the footsteps of those early Chinese students really shed a new light on the understanding of the path these pioneers have embarked on to lift China out of turmoil. That's all for today's program. I'm Dale Fox. Thank you for watching.